Hi, my name is Madison Crowe. I'm 25 years old, and this is a true story about something that happened to me that turned my entire world upside down. I'm sharing this because for years I stayed silent, but now I feel people need to hear it. It all began with one night, one conversation, and one mistake that led to years of hidden pain, fear, and an unshakable hunger for revenge. What happened wasn't an accident, it was deliberate, and the person responsible never thought I'd find out the truth. If you want to know how I went from a quiet, trusting daughter to someone who planned every move like a chess player seeking checkmate, you need to hear this story to the very end. Because nothing about it is ordinary. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to support my work. This story is written and edited by Diaries. When I think back to that night, the air felt different, heavy, like it was carrying something that wanted to crush me before it even happened. It was mid-October in our small Illinois town, the kind where everyone knows your name and every neighbor pretends to care about each other's lives. My father, Charles Crowe, was one of the most respected men around, or at least that's the mask he wore in public. Inside our home, there were cracks, subtle ones, like the way my mother's eyes avoided his when he spoke, or the way his smile never quite reached his eyes when he looked at me. That night, I was coming home late from my part-time shift at the coffee shop. The streets were quiet except for the occasional gust of wind sweeping dead leaves across the asphalt. I walked into the house expecting the usual mom asleep on the couch, dad in his study, but instead I found my mom sitting at the dining table, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. She looked like she'd been crying for hours. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice hesitant, because in our house asking questions wasn't always safe. She didn't answer right away, just handed me the paper. It was a letter handwritten in shaky cursive addressed to my mom. As I read, my stomach twisted. Every word felt like a punch. The letter accused my father of something unthinkable, something connected to a tragedy I barely remembered. The night my uncle, my father's own brother, had died in what we'd been told was a car accident. But this letter claimed it wasn't an accident at all. It said my father had been involved, that he had reasons to want his own brother gone, and that certain people had helped him cover it up. My first instinct was to think it was some cruel joke, but the trembling in my mom's hands told me she believed it, or at least feared it might be true. She whispered, "You can't tell him you saw this, Maddie. Promise me." I promised, but inside my mind was spinning. Over the next few days, the letter became a shadow over everything. I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before. Dad's short temper when certain topics came up, the way he changed the subject when my uncle's name was mentioned, the locked drawer in his study that he never let anyone touch. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I actually knew about that night. Years ago, I started asking quiet questions, but in a small town, curiosity is dangerous, especially when the person you're curious about has influence. One night while my parents were asleep, I crept into Dad's study. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might wake them. I tried the drawer, locked, but locks have keys, and I'd seen him hide one once in a hollowed-out book on his shelf. My hand shook as I opened it, finding not just one letter, but several different handwriting, different dates, all pointing toward the same story. Some were from people I didn't know, others unsigned, but the message was always the same. My father had enemies, and some of them knew exactly what he had done. One letter even mentioned my mother by name, suggesting she knew more than she pretended. That's when I realized this wasn't just about my father's past, it was about my family's present and maybe even my future. I couldn't sleep that night. Every sound in the house made me think he knew I'd been in his drawer. The next morning at breakfast, he looked at me a little too long before asking how work was. My throat went dry. He smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was one of those calculated smiles that feels like someone measuring you up. I didn't tell Mom I had found more letters. I didn't trust her not to break under pressure. Instead, I began writing down everything. I saw every suspicious conversation, every unexplained absence. My friends thought I was acting strange, and maybe I was, but I was starting to see my father for who he really was, and I knew if I confronted him too soon, I might end up like my uncle. Days turned into weeks, and my silent investigation grew. I learned that my father had business ties with people who didn't operate in daylight, men who spoke in half sentences, who showed up at odd hours. I overheard phone calls where my father spoke in a tone I never heard before, cold and commanding, almost like he was giving orders. And then, one evening I followed him. He left the house after dinner saying he was meeting a client. I stayed far enough back to avoid his headlights, my old car rumbling quietly in the dark. He drove to the edge of town to an abandoned factory I've passed 100 times but never entered. I watched him step inside with another man, tall, wearing a black coat. They stayed inside for nearly an hour, and when my father came out, he was holding something. A small box. He looked around before putting it in. His trunk, I don't know what was in it, but in that moment I knew two things. One, my father was hiding more than I had imagined, and two, whatever was in that box was the first step in proving the truth. I didn't know yet how deep I'd have to go or how much danger I'd be walking into, but something inside me shifted that night. This wasn't just about answers anymore. This was about justice and maybe revenge. The following morning, I couldn't stop thinking about that small box my father had carried out of the factory. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch. I had to know what was inside. For the rest of the day, I tried to act normal, laughing at my coworkers' jokes, answering Mom's casual questions, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. That night after dinner, Dad took his usual seat in the living room to watch the late news, and I watched his every movement like a hawk. He kept the car keys close right on the coffee table, almost as if he knew I might try something. I waited until he went upstairs, probably to take one of those long showers he took when he didn't want to be disturbed, before quietly slipping the keys into my hoodie pocket outside. The night was freezing, the kind of cold that made every breath feel like shards of glass in your lungs, but adrenaline kept me warm. I crept to the garage, unlocked the trunk, and there it was, the same box, plain and unmarked but heavy for its size. I hesitated, my pulse hammering in my ears. If I opened it and he noticed, he would know I'd been snooping, but if I didn't, I'd go insane. I pried it open slowly, the faint creak of the lid sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. Inside was a stack of old photographs, a small handgun, and something that sent a chill all the way to my bones, a blood-stained gold watch. I recognized it instantly. It had belonged to my uncle, the same one from the accident. My heart almost stopped. Tucked underneath the photos was a folded piece of paper with a list of names, 7 of them, each with a date next to it. My uncle's name was first dated the night of his death. My mother's name was there too, with no date yet. My own name was at the very bottom, no date. I froze, staring at it, unable to breathe. It felt like looking into a death sentence, waiting for its turn. My hand shook so badly, I almost dropped the paper. I shoved everything back exactly as I found it, closed the trunk, and returned the keys before he came back downstairs that night. I didn't sleep at all. I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every shadow in my room looking like it might move. My mind kept replaying a list of names, especially mine at the bottom. Was it a hit list? A warning? A sick game? I needed answers. But I couldn't risk confronting him directly. Instead, I decided to focus on the names. If I could find out who they were and what had happened to them, maybe I could figure out the truth over the next few days. I became an amateur detective. I searched public records, old newspapers, even local gossip pages. Every single name on that list except for mine and my mother's belonged to someone who had died in accidents or under unexplained circumstances over the past 15 years. Car crashes, house fires, a boating incident, every one of them tragic but suspicious in the details. And here's the thing, in every single case, my father had some kind of connection to the victim, either through business, family, or old friendships. The more I uncovered, the more a horrible picture began to form. My father wasn't just a bad man. He was dangerous, and if my name was on that list, it meant I was in danger too. The question was, why? One night I confronted my mother, not directly, but by showing her one of the old news articles about my uncle's death. I asked her if she ever wondered if it was really an accident. She froze her fork halfway to her mouth, then set it down without answering. Something's Madison, she said quietly, or better left alone. Her eyes were wet, and I could tell she was holding something back. That only made me more determined. The next turning point came 2 weeks later. Dad was out of town for business, and Mom had gone to visit her sister, leaving me alone in the house. I took the opportunity to search his study again. But this time I wasn't looking in drawers. I was looking for hidden spaces, and I found one. Behind a row of books on the bottom shelf, there was a loose wooden panel. When I pried it open, there was a small metal box inside, locked but easy enough to force open with a screwdriver. Inside were more photographs, this time of people I didn't recognize, but all taken in the same style, candid shots like they didn't know they were being photographed. In the corner of each photo was a number written in red ink. The highest number I saw was 21. I couldn't make sense of it, but I knew these people were important. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A photo of me taken from outside my bedroom window. The number 22 was scrawled in red ink in the corner. I dropped it like it burned me. Whoever my father really was, whatever he was planning. I was next in line for something I didn't want to find out about. I started to make plans, escape plans. I figured if I could gather enough proof, I could go to the police, but I also knew that in a small town where my father had influence, the police might not be on my side. I needed allies, people outside of his reach. That's When I thought of Liam, my uncle's old best friend, he'd moved away years ago after the accident, but I found him on social media. I sent him a vague but urgent message asking if he knew anything about my uncle's death. He replied within an hour, "Meet me, not safe to talk here." The next night I drove to a diner 2 towns over to meet him. Liam looked older, more tired, but when he saw me, he knew exactly why I was there. "I tried to warn your mother," he said as soon as we sat down. She wouldn't listen, she was teared. He told me my father and uncle had been involved in some shady land deals years ago, ones that turned violent. My uncle had threatened to expose everything, and days later he was dead. Liam was certain my father had orchestrated it, but he had no proof. When I told him about the box, the list of names, and the photos, his face turned pale. "That's his ledger," he said. "Not money, people, every name on that list. They were in his way." My hands tightened around my coffee mug, and my name's on it. He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. Before we left, he gave me a burner phone. "If anything happens, call me. Don't call the police, they won't protect you from him." Driving home that night, the weight of what I'd learned settled over me like a shroud. My father wasn't just dangerous, he was calculating, patient, and always 10 steps ahead if I wanted to survive. I had to be smarter, faster, and willing to go further than I'd ever imagined. Revenge wasn't just a desire anymore. It was the only way out. I spent the next few days living in a state of hyper-awareness, every sound outside my window, every creak of the floorboards making my heart jolt. My father returned from his business trip 2 days after my meeting with Liam, and I could feel his eyes on me in a way that made my skin crawl. It was like he was searching for cracks, testing my reactions. Maybe even sensing that I knew more than I should. I avoided being alone in a room with him whenever possible, using the excuse of extra shifts at the coffee shop or study groups with friends. Anything to keep some distance, but I also knew I couldn't just run. Disappearing without a plan would only make him hunt me faster. I needed to dismantle him from the inside, take away his power, and leave him with nothing. To do that, I had to get my hands on more of his ledger and find proof that couldn't be denied. Late one night, after pretending to be asleep, I heard him leave the house. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, like someone trying not to wake the dead. I waited a full 10 minutes before slipping out myself and following at a distance. His car led me back to that same abandoned factory. I parked far enough away to avoid notice and crept closer on foot, the gravel crunching under my boots, sounding deafening in the stillness. Through a dirty window, I could see him talking to 2 men. One was the tall guy from before, and the other I didn't recognize. My father handed them an envelope thick with papers, and the tall man passed him a black duffel bag in return. He unzipped it briefly, and even from a distance I could see the glint of stacks of cash. My stomach twisted. I didn't have a phone that could zoom clearly in the dark, but I snapped several photos anyway, hoping they might capture something useful. I was so focused on framing the shots that I didn't notice a third man step out from the shadows behind me. His voice was low and sharp. "You're not supposed to be here." I spun around, my mind racing for an excuse, but he stepped closer, and I caught the faint bulge of a gun under his jacket. I forced a nervous laugh. I got lost just looking for a shortcut back to the main road. His eyes didn't soften. "Leave now." I didn't need telling twice. I bolted, my pulse thundering, not stopping until I was in my car with the doors locked. As I drove away, I checked my mirror over and over, certain I'd see headlights following me. But the road stayed empty. When I got home, my father's car wasn't in the driveway yet. I knew it was only a matter of time before he learned someone had been lurking near his meeting, and if that someone could be traced back to me, I was finished. I called Liam from the burner phone and told him what happened. His voice was grim. "He's tightening the net. You need to move faster." That was when Liam gave me a piece of advice that stuck. If you want to take him down, you can't just catch him in the act. You have to make him think he's still in control while you pull the floor out from under him. That meant I had to play a role, act like I was the same naive daughter who believed every lie. Over the next week, I forced myself to smile at his jokes, ask him about work, even sit with him during dinner like nothing had changed. Inside, it made my stomach churn. But it worked. His guard seemed to drop, if only slightly. One evening, he left his phone on the kitchen counter while taking a call in his study. My hands moved on instinct, unlocking it with the code I memorized years ago. I only had seconds, but in that time, I managed to forward 3 emails to the burner phone, each containing attachments of scanned contracts, names, and payment records. When I opened them later, I realized these were deals tied to every victim on his list, each document linked to offshore accounts and shell companies. If the police wouldn't listen before, this might be enough to force an investigation. if I could get it into the right hands, but the danger was growing. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of footsteps. Outside my bedroom door, they stopped and I could see the faint shadow of someone standing there through the gap at the bottom. I held my breath until the shadow moved away. In the morning, I found a note slipped under my door. Stay out of things. You don't understand. No signature, no handwriting I recognized. My blood ran cold. It wasn't from my father. That meant someone else in his circle knew I was digging. I decided to test my father's reactions. That night at dinner, I casually mentioned Liam's name. Watching his face closely, he froze for a fraction of a second before laughing it off. Haven't heard from that guy in years, he said, but his eyes had gone sharp. Calculating, I realized I had just put Liam in danger by confirming we were in contact. I excused myself, locked my bedroom door, and called Liam to warn him. He didn't pick up. I tried again. No answer. Panic clawed at my chest. The next morning, I drove to the address he'd given me, but the place was empty. No sign of a struggle, but it looked like someone had left in a hurry. A neighbor said they'd seen 2 men loading boxes into a van late at night. My father was already at work by the time I got home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd made. Liam disappeared to cut off my only ally. That was the moment my revenge turned personal in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about justice for my uncle anymore. It was about everyone he'd silenced, including Liam. I began making copies of every piece of evidence I had and storing them in different places, one at a friend's apartment, one in a safety deposit box in a nearby city. I also started leaving a digital trail with timed emails set to send automatically if something happened to me. If he wanted to silence me, he'd have to deal with the fact that my story would still get out. But the final push came a week later when I overheard my parents arguing. My mother's voice was shaky, pleading, while my father's was low and venomous. She's getting too close, he said. We can't risk it. My mother whispered something I couldn't catch, and he snapped, then maybe it's time she had an accident. I backed away from the door, my whole body trembling there. It was confirmation of everything I'd feared. He wasn't going to wait. He was going to make his move soon. And that meant I had to make mine first. The question was no longer if I would strike back, but how. I didn't have the luxury of time anymore. After hearing my father talk about giving me an accident, every hour felt like a countdown I couldn't see. I spent that night reviewing every piece of evidence I had collected, the emails, the contracts, the photographs, the list of names, and most importantly, the photo of the blood-stained gold watch. I needed to take it all to someone who couldn't be bought. Someone outside my father's reach, and I knew the only option was to go federal. The problem was getting to them without him finding out. I decided to use his own arrogance against him. That weekend, he had planned to take me and my mother to a family dinner at one of his business associates' homes. I told him I couldn't make it because I picked up an extra shift at the coffee shop. He didn't like it, but he didn't push, probably because he assumed I wouldn't dare cross him openly. The moment his car disappeared down the street with my mother in the passenger seat, I grabbed the hidden stash of evidence, stuffed it into my backpack, and drove to a federal field office 2 hours away. I didn't call ahead, didn't post anything online. I just walked in and asked to speak to someone about a major criminal case involving corruption, fraud, and multiple suspicious deaths. At first they looked at me like I might be some conspiracy theorist, but once I laid everything out on the table, their expressions changed. The agents asked me question after question, taking notes, examining the photos, and making copies of everything. They assured me they would start an investigation immediately, but I knew it wouldn't be fast enough to protect me. In the meantime, I asked them for protection, but they explained that until charges were formally filed, they couldn't guarantee anything. That was when I realized the next phase of my plan had to be bolder. If my father suspected I'd gone to the authorities, he'd make his move that night, so I decided to make him believe I was still clueless while setting up the perfect trap. When he and my mother came home, I acted exactly the way I used to, smiling, asking how the dinner went, even offering to make him coffee. But earlier, while he was gone, I had planted a small voice recorder in his study, hidden inside a decorative globe he never touched. My goal was simple: get him to talk, to say something incriminating without realizing he was being recorded. The opportunity came faster than I expected. Later that night, I accidentally mentioned seeing someone from the factory in town. He narrowed his eyes and asked who, and when I gave a vague description, he muttered, "That idiot should know better than to be seen here after what happened." I played dumb, asking what happened. That's when he said it flat out, that certain people didn't survive long when they became a liability. Just like my uncle, my heart was pounding, but I kept my face neutral. The recorder caught every word. The next morning, I sent a copy of the recording to the federal agents along with a short message: "You'll want to move fast," and they did. Within 48 hours agents arrived at our house with a search warrant. My father tried to play the respectable citizen, laughing and calling it all a misunderstanding, but when they opened the trunk of his car and found the box, the photographs, the watch, the gun, it was over. My mother stood frozen in the doorway, her hand over her mouth as they handcuffed him and read him his rights. He looked at me as they led him away, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't control or calculation, it was fear. The trial took months, but the evidence was overwhelming. The contracts, the offshore accounts, the ledger of names, the recording together, they painted a picture even his expensive lawyers couldn't erase. He was convicted on multiple counts, including conspiracy to commit murder. He'll be in prison for the rest of his life. My mother eventually admitted she had suspected the truth for years, but was too afraid to act. We're still working through what that means for our relationship, but at least she's free now. As for me, I moved to another city, changed my number, and started fresh. People sometimes ask if I feel better now that he's gone, and the truth is, it's complicated. Revenge doesn't bring people back, and it doesn't erase the fear you've lived with, but it does something else. It gives you back your power, and for me that was worth everything. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've made it this far, please subscribe, like, and share so more people can hear it. This story was written and edited by Dark Lifeside Diaries.